Hi there, how you doing? Welcome to your market statistics for November 2018. So today we're going to take a look back, see what happened in October for 2018, and then we're going to take a little look ahead and see what do we have coming as we start to move into the winter months. So November's an interesting month, and it's an interesting month because oftentimes as you're moving from summer into fall, you can see some sustained sales. And most of the reason why is you can just logically think people want to move before winter. And then once winter hits, people want to hunker down, and then spring you start to see an increased number of sales. So November is somewhat of a turning point because we started to exhaust the fall months, and now we're starting to move into the winter months. So it's an important month to really watch this month coming forward because it can dictate how things will look as we start to move into December and January before we then come into the spring market this next year in 2019. So it's a really important one to watch. So let's see what's happened over the course of the last few months. If you remember last month, we talked a little bit about detached, but this month we're starting to see more increase in detached product as far as inventory levels go. So why? What's happening here? This has been the one staple that's hung on, it seems like. Over the course of the last 3 years, oftentimes you're talking about maybe the luxury market being heavily impacted, the apartment sector being heavily impacted. But then, we've been saying, that detached, well-priced property continues to just truck along there and sales still happen. And that is still the case. Sales are still decent within that sector. However, we have started to see an increase in months of inventory. So decreased sales, increased inventory, increased months of inventory. Months of inventory is that one that we watch very, very closely. And it's how many months it will take, given the number of sales over the past month, to clean up all of the inventory on the market for simplicity's sake. So it's a very, very telling statistic. So what's happening here and where have we seen it? Specifically on the detached side, we're seeing about 600 to 1 million is where we saw the largest increase in months of inventory, the largest increase in inventory. So who are those buyers that want to get into there that aren't necessarily buying? Well, the answer is a move-up buyer. Typically, you have a move-up buyer that's in that 600 to 1 million range. It's typically not your first-time home buyer that moved to Calgary, got a job, and now is looking for a property. Most of the time, it's somebody who's in Calgary, potentially established themselves, and now they want to move up. However, if you're not able to sell your product, then how do you move up to the next property? This is something we talked about last month too, that domino effect. And if you're not able to sell this, and even though you want to take advantage of the market, you want to get up to that property at 750, you're just not able to if you're not able to sell this. So it just becomes this cycle of what's happening. And then as you continue to move down, 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 you're starting to see that the prices will be impacted. So on the detached side, yes, prices are down. Prices are down slightly though. Inventory levels have risen, but prices haven't really responded. So it'll be an important one to watch as you start to move through the winter months. If we continue to see an increased level of inventory, oftentimes when you move into winter, some sellers don't come on the market. But if inventory does continue to rise and sales continue to fall, months of inventory continues to rise, then there is that downward pressure on the detached product. But remember, this has always been that staple, so it's an interesting thing to see. On that same note, we're seeing it in the Northwest, which has hung on for a while. The Northeast has hung on, and the South. These areas have hung on with regards to that detached product. All of these areas in the detached sector have sustained some decrease over the past month. So an interesting one to watch. Apartments. Apartments we talked a little bit about last month, where we saw actually an easing in inventory, which was great. This was welcomed, right? We wanted a little bit more of an easing for the inventory. And again, this month we're seeing it again. So inventory levels are easing. Potentially people aren't coming on the market, and sales are just continuing on as they are. Now, if you look at it on a year-to-date basis, and you look at detached on a year-to-date basis, apartments have dropped in price more so than the detached product, even though the detached product has seen an increased rise in inventory. Oftentimes you're seeing this because in the apartment sector, we know we have to be competitive on price. If you want to sell it, you just have to. This has been the story that we've been hearing over and over again. And maybe on the detached side, you've been trying to test the market or something like that. So because we've been hearing that, oftentimes sellers are a little bit more motivated and they are a little bit more understanding of the market conditions on the apartment side. So they've heard that prices have decreased over the course of months, years. So when they come on, they say, yeah, we got to get competitive with this. So you're causing that little decrease in price, but then you're also seeing some sales. So quite interesting, because here you have a decrease in benchmark price. However, the detached sector has a larger increase in months of inventory on a percentage basis, but the price decrease isn't quite as much. But that could change over time, right? If this continues to happen over a period of time, then that downward pressure continues. So for apartments, ultimately, not a huge change from last month. If you're selling, again, you still have to be competitive. You have to understand where you're at. You have to be competitive in all sectors. But at least we're starting to see a little bit of that easing as we start to move into those winter months. The attached product. We did spend some time on this the last 2 months, where we were talking about the attached product and the semi-detached product, specifically within that inner city, where we saw this rising and rising levels of inventory, which was a somewhat cause of concern. As these levels of inventory continue to rise in this inner city, which is predominantly those infill style properties, there weren't the buyers and they were coming on and prices had to come down. Now that inventory is still quite high. You're looking at 8 to 9 months of inventory on the market for that product. So it's not like it's dropped drastically, but it has eased a little bit, which is really good to see. The attached side has kind of moved when you're looking attached. So we're talking row in conjunction with semi-detached. So putting both of these together, although they are two separate entities into themselves. So row being, say, apartment style townhomes, and then semi-detached being attached by one wall. But when you look at that, they're moving somewhat in line with the detached. So easing, but not necessarily the price drop yet. So although those inventory levels continue to rise and the sales continue to decrease, the price drop of year to date, we're looking at less than 2%. So 1 to 2%, same thing with detached, 1 to 2% on the lower end of that. And then on the apartment side, when we're looking at year to date, we're talking 2 to 3% drop in benchmark price. So not that benchmark price is that end all be all, but it does just show potentially the motivation in the apartment sector and the sellers having an understanding of, hey, I've heard month over month that we're in somewhat of a challenging situation when we're listing our apartment. Therefore, let's get competitive, let's sell the thing. Where on the semi-detached row or the detached side of things, maybe the sellers are somewhat like, you know, there's still some sales happening. I've heard that this type of product has been hanging on. But we just caution that if you are coming on the market, and you are across any sector for that type, but specifically if you're looking detached and you're looking at an attached product, we do have to be competitive, because we have seen that rise in inventory. So we have seen a rise in months of inventory year to date across everything, detached, apartment, and detached. Over the past few months, inventory levels have eased in apartment, but we're still seeing a rise year to date across all sectors. So what does this mean in conclusion as we start to move forward? Well, we're starting to move into November, December, January, which just by the natural flow of the market is a little bit slower. So if we continue to see this rising level of inventory and the sales stay low, then we could be in for somewhat of a challenging winter time here. That's not to say sales won't happen and there's not going to be great opportunities for both buyers and sellers, but we just have to be very, very price conscious as sellers. And we also have to be very aggressive when it comes to the marketing campaigns that we put together, because we need to differentiate one property versus the next, especially because you don't want to have that race to the bottom. So if your property has something that another property doesn't have, and you're competing with each other and you're at a similar price point, really, really, really make sure that you let the buyers know why yours is slightly better, because you need to differentiate yourself between that one, or quite a bit better if you're at the same price. But if you're competing and you know buyers are going to go through both of these, either you have to compete on price and say, look, I understand we need to sell, let's go here, and let's be the first choice for the buyer. Or if you're here and you know that your property does have a lot to offer in comparison to this one, then be sure the buyers are aware of it, because they're not going to pay over market value. They're not going to pay over market value across any sector for that matter. So you have to really differentiate the property. So again, interesting month as we're starting to move into November, that switch as we start to move into those winter months. Let's see what's going to happen. Watch the detached market. If those inventory levels do continue to rise, then there's going to be more opportunities for buyers on the detached side of things. Apartment sector, not bad news for you as a seller because there is some easing, but still the months of inventory over the long term have increased and the prices have decreased. So again, competitive on price point. And then finally attached, following similar trajectory to detached, where we've seen a price drop, we've seen a rise in inventory levels. But just keep conscious if you do have an infill property within the inner city, that's still somewhat of a precarious spot to be because of the high months of inventory. Thank you very much for watching this. We'll see you next month.